So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. For those who don't know me, my name is Michelle Monroe. I am the Central Coordinator for Parent, Caregiver, and Community Engagement with the Toronto District School Board. And one of the portfolios that I support is Community Advisory Committees. So before I go any further, I'll just open us up with our land acknowledgement. The land we're meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I also want to acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. So the purpose of us gathering for this quick micro session is simply to, one, outline the immediate impact and implications of PR 741, which is the governance procedure for community advisory communities, and PR 742, which is the operational procedure for community advisory committees, and also to take any questions or queries that members may have either about the procedure itself or the process related to the procedure. So I just quickly ask that I will take questions at the end of the presentation, just because I want to ensure that the information gets relayed and that we get through this in a timely way. So the way I've structured the presentation is I just want to quickly provide overview as to the procedure itself, and then I want to go directly into impact and then speak to some implications and then next steps, and then I'll open the floor for Q&A. So I'll begin with, so I'm hoping by now many have seen the CAC operational procedure, which is 742. And operational 742 really speaks to members, staff who are on community advisory committees and the operational processes around the community advisory committees. While 741 speaks to the governance procedure that includes provision that looks at the authority and the responsibility of the Board of Trustees in terms of their roles and their direct governance around the way community advisory committees will operate. So within PR 741, you will find the ways in which CACs are established, the way they can be dissolved, the way they're approved, terms of reference amendments, the way CACs report to the board, as well as provisions related to the roles, responsibilities of individual trustees that sit on CACs. So I want to just outline quickly how community advisory committees are defined within this new procedure. They're defined as an advisory committee of the board that provides the board with ongoing community advice on specific areas of board policy, as well as on educational issues of community interest. CACs include committees established in accordance with legislation. For example, the Parent Involvement Advisory Committee, which is established by Regulation 33010, also known as Regulation 612, and the Special Education Advisory Committee under Section 46497. So the scope of the procedure also supports the implementation of the Community Engagement Policy, P078, and of course is in alignment with the two regulations of 612, Parent Involvement Advisory Committee, and the Special Education Advisory Committee. These are presently the active Community Advisory Committee of the board. And these 10 Community Advisory Committees, we used the name Community Advisory Committee because these Community Advisory Committees are actually board approved, which is at the purview of the purview of the trustees to establish or dissolve community advisory committees, because they are the ones who have the purview over these committees in relations to some of the very specific impacts around PR 741 and 742. So now that it's been approved, all community committees that advise the board are now considered community advisory committees. That is a slight shift. Prior to PR 741 and 742 being approved, we had statutory committees. And what we simply meant by statutory is that the Ministry of Education has indicated to boards across the province, not just TDSB, that they will have certain committees. And those for us is, of course, the standing committees of the board that are required in legislation. So for example, the standing of the committee of the board will include the governance committee of the board, the finance budget enrollment committee of the board, program and school services committee of the board. And those committees, the structure and the membership of that are solely trustees. The other committees that are mandated by the ministry is the Special Education Advisory Committee and the Parent Involvement Advisory Committee. So those committees, while they are mandated by the ministry within the structure of the Toronto District School Board, they are considered community advisory committees under this new procedure. So in this new procedure, you will see them named as community advisory committees. Them being named as community advisory committees does not remove their statutory or legislative requirements that comes with them. So this procedure will come into effect when we're speaking of CAC or PIAC only in areas that are not covered within the legislation that's outlined for the operations of both of those committees. The second is all CACs and guests who attend meetings are now operating within the parameters of 741 and 742. And all CAC terms of reference must be reviewed to align with PR 741 and 742. And CACs will now be reviewed every 3 years. There are more impacts, but I really wanted to highlight the most immediate ones that will be having impact on the operations of CACs within the board. The other element is there's now a limit set on active community advisory committees, and I'll be addressing that just a little later. So these are, of course, as mentioned earlier, the statutory committees, meaning again, committees that are legislated by the Ministry of Education, which is our Parent Involvement Advisory Committee and our Special Education Advisory Committee. So what are some of the implications of this new procedure? One of them is the establishment of committees. And in PR 741, it really outlines the roles and responsibilities of the Board of Trustees as it relates to community advisory committees. And so one of the implications that is any future committee of the board must be established by the board. Any terms of reference in a new committee or existing committee must be approved by the board, and that the board now has the purview to dissolve a community advisory committee, of course, subject to applicable legislation. And what subject to applicable legislation means that the board cannot dissolve the Special Education Advisory Committee or the Parent Involvement Advisory Committee because they fall under the ministry's legislation, and they are able to establish their own terms of reference. However, for the additional 10 that are established by the board now has the purview to dissolve those committees either every 3 years after their review or any time throughout the year at the discretion of the board. And mandates, membership, composition, terms of reference will be provided to the Board of Trustees for approval. And of course, any other statutory CACs, the board will honor their legislation. Another implication is, again, the minimum and maximum number of advisory committees. The board has never, in the history I've been here, ever set this. So the approval is that there will be a minimum of 2 and a maximum of 10 CACs. And new CAC may be established every 3 years during CAC reviews. And so this is a fairly new piece for CACs and for the board itself in terms of how it determines when it will review. So right now, the board has 10 community advisory committees, 12 community advisory committees. In light of its 10, which means is established by the board, if the board wishes, under this new procedure, to approve any additional advisory committees, it would have to review existing committees to determine how it's going to maintain that number of 10. And that's a part of its new operation. The dissolution, now CACs can be dissolved under this new procedure, and it will happen with a process that's outlined within the procedure, and it can occur at an organizational meeting or by resolution at any time as required by the Board of Trustees. Some other implications is this procedure actually outlines trustee role and responsibility. And it speaks specifically to the number of trustees that may sit or may be appointed or elected to an advisory committee. And that's a minimum of 2 trustees be elected, appointed to CACs, a maximum, of 2 trustees be elected and appointed to CACs for 1 year at the board organizational meeting. Or a trustee may be appointed to a community advisory committee. Appointment will occur, for example, mid-year, a trustee may have to leave a CAC for one reason or the other. This now provides a process where the board is now responsible for appointing someone to ensure that a CAC will always have a trustee representative. It also outlines where trustees are elected or appointed. The trustees not appointed as co-chair may serve as an alternate. Trustees who are not appointed as a co-chair may not sit as a co-chair at a CAC, even in the absence of a CAC, of a trustee. So example, if you're at your CAC meeting and your trustee had notified you that they cannot attend, but they have identified the alternate. If the alternate during the board org process was not identified as the co-chair, they may not sit as the co-chair. However, they may represent the trustee at your meeting. And so in a scenario like that, it's the community co-chair that will be responsible for chairing that meeting. The other implication is trustees appointed to CACs must attend meeting, speak to a motion under consideration by the CAC. And this is fairly new. Trustees cannot move or second a motion, neither can they vote or be counted toward quorum. This is a really significant shift for some CACs because in the past, trustees had the purview to vote. Under this new procedure, they do not have the purview to vote. They cannot be considered or counted towards your quorum, and they cannot move a motion. And the last one, I'm thinking it's the last implications for PR 741 is overview and reporting to the board. So in the past, CACs have been able to report to the Program and School Services Committee. Under this new procedure, CACs can report to any standing committee of the board. And each standing committee is now asked to establish a standard agenda item for CACs. If you recall earlier, I named the standing committees of the board. Examples are the Program and School Services Committee, the Finance, Budget, Enrollment Committee, the Governance and Policy Committee of the board. And so CACs may now report out to any of those committees. And the process for that is also outlined in terms of these new procedures. And it is named in this procedure that it is only recommendations now that will flow from advisory committees to trustees. So for example, prior to these procedures, community advisory committees once upon a time would provide a summary of their meetings to the Board of Trustees. Under these procedures, you're not providing your summary, you're simply providing only recommendations that the Community Advisory Committee has passed a motion on that will move to the board for their consideration. So other implication is requesting information. This is fairly new for the operations of CACs, and there is an outline process for how CACs will request information. Now, the requesting of information still allows and requires that staff provide regular updates and report to CACs as outlined within the CAC's mandate. That is an expectation and a regularly ongoing practice of staff at CACs. The new piece is if the information being requested by a CAC is not readily available and has to be retrieved, assembled, compiled in a particular format, the CACs are required now to pass a resolution requesting that information of the board and ensure that the information requested is aligned with the mandate of the advisory committee. Once that resolution gets approved at the committee, then staff is required to assess the information and then determine the feasibility of the request, keeping in consideration whether the information being requested has already been publicly shared elsewhere and could be received and referred to the CAC. If it's confidential information and any personal information, if the request is operational or governance related, and if it's operationally viable at the particular time of the request, to make the report available. And that's really around the work that may be already assigned to staff by the board, any costs that may be linked to the request, and resource implications for that request. So just quickly, some updates in terms of where we're moving in terms of information sessions. So we had our CAC procedure virtual presentation that took place for CAC members on March 21st. We're doing this micro session, which will focus on impact and implications. We'll be holding another micro session on the 3rd that will look very specifically at the community advisory review process. We'll want to provide details what that will entail. And then we'll do another micro session on the 15th that will look at terms of reference, update, and revisions. And this is just trying to respond specifically to the areas that I've heard from CAC co-chairs and others that may be areas that they want to get more detail in and for me to dig a little deeper in. So we certainly hope that you'll be able to join us for those additional sessions. This is just a broader rollout to give you a sense of how we're rolling out the procedure. So we've rolled out the procedure with staff. We're doing it with the CAC members. We'll be doing it also with trustees, and we'll also be doing conversations with the co-chairs of the Parent Involvement Advisory Committee and the Special Education Advisory Committee. My office is also working on some tools to support the procedure rollout. So we are working on a terms of reference template. We've heard from CAC co-chairs and for staff that that would be very helpful in guiding CACs in terms of revising their templates. And we're also looking at a template for the CAC review process that will assist staff in engaging in the CAC review process. We've also heard during the review process that it may be helpful for us to revisit the agenda template, look at drafting a motion template, and maybe tweaking the CAC minutes template. And so we'll be looking at those pieces as we move throughout the procedure rollout. Immediate next steps. We're asking that all members and all staff review both PR 741 and 742 to become familiar with it. While I try to use these information sessions to answer questions and to present and highlight sections of the procedure, I'll not be able to cover every sort of corner of it. So I really encourage you, if you've not taken a look at it yet, to do so. It could be found on the board's main website by just Googling community advisory committees. Ensure that this year's CAC agendas include an update on Procedure 741 and 742 and speak of the CACs up for review. I really think it's important that every CAC at this point has this on the agenda to keep it fresh for all members, that CAC co-chairs, you're fully aware of what's upcoming and what's required, and the procedures will speak to that. And we're asking that CAC start having conversations about review of their terms of reference to begin to align with that with the new procedures. And in light of the review, that all CACs that you have ensure that you had submitted your 2023-2024, your self-evaluation and your annual reports, because those are the tools, your 2022-2023 and 2023-24 reports are the reports that will be used in terms of the review if you're one of the community advisor committees that are up for review. And of course, we're posting all information and resources related to the review on the board's public site. You go to tdsb.on.ca and do a search for community advisory committees. It will take you to the page, and we will be trying to put all of this information there so you will be able to have access to that information. And thank you so much. And now I'll be open to any questions.